Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Luke Hunt and this is another podcast for The Diplomat, and with me today is Bradley Merg, who wears many hats, and today he's speaking as a distinguished fellow and senior advisor for research at the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace. Bradley, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Luke. It's great to be back.
We've had a rather interesting month in Cambodia and Bali and Bangkok with the ASEAN Leaders Summit, the G20 and APEC, and then there was the COP20 on top of all that. What are the key takeaways? It's been unprecedented in the sense of how many leaders, how many issues, what's been put on the table, what was achieved, and what was left off.
Well, broadly speaking, I think the theme that runs through both of these for Southeast Asia is the comparative and relative success of both Cambodia's role as ASEAN chair, along with Indonesia's role chairing the G20. We didn't see, particularly for Cambodia, a repeat of the events of its previous chairmanship, which was a major goal. And Indonesia was able to successfully shepherd through a number of initiatives as well. At the same time, if we were actually going list form for what's the most salient, for ASEAN it's obviously the agreement in principle to admit Timor-Leste. And finally make good on that. As President Ramos Horta has noted, it's easier to get into heaven than it is to get into ASEAN, apparently. But
yes.
So Timor-Leste moving into the club and now being able to join all observer meetings as it finalizes the process is quite significant. At the same time at the G20, we did see the U.S. and China have significant side meeting between President Biden and President Xi, and the agreement that they will begin to renew cooperation on climate change. At the same time, the agreement that Secretary Blinken will make a visit to China next year. I think it's been 4 years since we've had a visit at that level. So it is significant progress, at least in terms of calming the waters to some degree.
Bit of a pushback from China in the sense that we've had, BRI, China expanding, China bad boy behaving badly. Given the isolation it's undergone over the last 2-3 years, particularly during COVID, there seems to be some kind of are we allowed in the club or not?
China's. I mean, if we were doing this before the recent events in Shanghai and in China, before the COVID protests started, but it was noticeable that China has come back, and China very much had strong meetings with South Korea, with the Philippines, with Japan, with Australia, the very memorable one with Canada and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but that China's been sort of reaching out to those states that it may have alienated, and at least attempting, it seems, to restore relations after years of wolf warrior diplomacy. But whether or not that bears fruit is another question. China does seem to be saying, okay, we're here, we're back, but whether we're actually going to see concrete progress on that other than photo ops is an open question.
They're very good photo ops, and I guess it should be pointed out that they pretty much put the BRI back on the agenda with a $1.6 billion expressway to be built from Phnom Penh to Bavet on the Vietnamese border.
BRI's back, and they've made their commitment, and we saw from the G7 states as well their own initiative essentially being pushed forward with quite a new bit of spending being rolled out. At the same time, though, it's that question of, all right, China's made commitments in the past. It made commitments that it would be doing high quality development, that it would be moving forward on this. It released its white paper in January of 2021, and now we're nearly 2 years away from that, and we don't really see significant progress or anything really measurable in terms of transparency, adhering to OECD Development Assistance Committee standards and practices. China continues to frame its aid as being something distinct and therefore following different rules under South-South cooperation. But Beijing set the bar for itself, and it now has to show where it is, and it can't just be more money.
Right.
It needs to be better quality projects.
While we're on the same topic, two issues that seem to be pushed completely into the sidelines. First was the South China Sea dispute, and as we both understand, the Cambodians were keen not to see that issue come to the fore. But the other one, which has been mentioned a few times over the past week, is the Mekong River. Didn't really rate a mention.
True. On on the first, we did see the G20 very much lead into COP27 and the outcomes there, particularly the 1.5 degree commitment and the maintenance thereof that we saw. There was some stage setting for what finally finished off at COP, not including the loss and damage agreement, which was very last minute, but was welcomed by many as at least a key first step in that area. In terms of the Mekong, no, we did not hear much at all in terms of future, in terms of commitments, in terms of, again, another Chinese commitment on hydrological data sharing. And where are we with that? Beijing's made that commitment and it really hasn't lived up to it. It continues to go on the offensive against entities that are working on the topic, and it does, such as Stimson, such as Eyes on the Earth and the Mekong Dam Monitor, and that is a continued issue. And just about 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference and hearing a Chinese colleague discussing China's commitments on a blue economy and on environmental protection and emergency preparedness. And it was stunning to hear someone say that when China's made very similar commitments to the Mekong region and has not fulfilled those. What's I think very interesting right now about China is that China's begun to essentially set its own standards for itself, and now China has to live up to them.
Right, are those standards higher than they were before? Are they high enough today?
They're not nearly as high as where many people would like them, but they're definitely at least some recognition that Beijing has made missteps. But the point is, you can make as many commitments as you want. If you don't follow through, then your credibility is lost in terms of other areas. When China says, oh, we're going to make a commitment on X, Y, and Z, it says, well, look what you did previously, and you didn't do it. Why should we believe you this time? How are you going to credibly commit to it?
Now, Biden did not go to APEC. Harris did attend. It's not that unusual, but it always seems to generate, why aren't you coming? Why aren't you there kind of thing. You have a very different take on this. Well, actually, a take I tend to agree with.
Yeah, it is. I mean, first let's look at Biden's schedule. I mean, he's hitting 3 summits in a row. I mean, he's pushing 80, and you could see he was pretty exhausted by the end. That's a heavy itinerary for anybody and a heavy number of official events. At the same time, though, Xi Jinping didn't come to Phnom Penh.
Right.
We got Li Keqiang. We did not see China show up to the ASEAN summit. And where if the U.S. doesn't show up or sends Vice President Harris, we always hear, oh, America doesn't care about ASEAN, Washington doesn't care about ASEAN. Well, we don't hear that about China.
Right.
It seems that there's a bit of a double standard from some of our friends in the region of Washington needs to be at every single event, but if China doesn't attend or doesn't equal on par, then crickets, absolute crickets. So I think that critique that it was valid during the Trump years and to some extent during the Obama period. But looking at the special ASEAN summit the U.S. held earlier this year, I mean, the U.S. has had a special summit. Its president has come to Phnom Penh. This is, and there's a new U.S. ambassador to ASEAN. I think that it's time to really move past the U.S. does not engage with ASEAN or the vice president is somehow a slight to ASEAN. The president lives in Washington, D.C. He doesn't live here in the region.
While we're on the subject of China, what do you make of the latest developments coming out of Shanghai?
It's too early to tell where this goes. I think that we're not able to make Tiananmen comparisons. That's a fundamentally different period, a fundamentally different challenge. What I think has been noticeable and is worth examining is that one, we're seeing these outside of not just Beijing, but Beijing, Shanghai, Kunming, across various cities in China, which is distinct. And that there appears to be some level of at least protesters knowing what other protesters are doing. There is some level of coordination there. We saw China try to flood Twitter with essentially pornography as a way to throw off access to a lot of locations, et cetera, that were, if you were searching for what's going on in X city, you'd come up with this. It's been noted by a few people earlier this morning. But we're not, this is the first time that there has not just been the statement of Xi Jinping stepped down. And then a direct critique of the Chinese Communist Party is unheard of that this would take place.
Would there be other factions inside the CCP contributing to this?
Looking at Xi Jinping's coming off of the last of the Party Congress, where we very vividly saw in October, we vividly saw former President Hu Jintao, whether it was a medical issue or not, but being walked away out of the conference hall in the Great Hall of the People. Xi Jinping is coming off of full consolidation of power and unprecedented third term. There really isn't any other faction left in the party. He has consolidated control. I mean, the irony, of course, is after finally consolidating control within 2 months, he's now seeing protests like the likes of which we've never seen before, in terms of open critique, where critique of Xi Jinping can get you arrested on any day of the week.
Sure.
But going out in public and seeing this at the elite universities, at Tsinghua, at Beijing University as well, and it's just now a question of, well, does this go? Does this continue? How is this going to develop over time? There's no way President Xi can allow this to continue. This is a direct threat to the maintenance of his rule. But Beijing has painted itself into a corner.
The protests spontaneous in that initially they were in Urumqi, which is understandable given the horrendous nature people have been treated, particularly the Muslims and the Uyghurs.
Well, I think we for Urumqi and Xinjiang, I think for this we have to put the Muslim, the Uyghur issue and the continued oppression of the Uyghurs, the concentration camps, etc., to one side, because these protests are definitely not about that. We're looking at Han Chinese essentially,
right.
Protesting, and this is all about COVID. This is about lockdowns, and this is about a run of bad stories for China, and a run of tragedies really, where people have died due to restriction measures, and the level of unwillingness to modify those. The center says it's going to modify, but officials at the provincial and the municipal level don't want to be caught out with rising case numbers. And now we're looking at a situation where it turns out China has vaccination rates that are actually not incredibly high for its elderly population. And the whole question of, well, Sinovac and Sinopharm, the rest of us have moved on from those and are all now taking Pfizer and Moderna and everything else. China's not. The efficacy of them are quite open to question. We know the new strain is relatively more virulent from what some of the research is telling us at this point. So where does China go? Is China able to actually open up and move on with this at the same time, dealing with the possibility of, okay, yeah, a lot of people could very easily die, but also dealing with a population that is sick of it, and at the same time is watching the rest of the world gather in Doha, not wearing masks, not social distancing, all cheering along the World Cup, which of course which China isn't even in this year, although it did make a very large point of how some of the equipment and the air conditioning is from China. But they're not playing. But they did note their trade contributions.
That helped.
Yes.
Moving back towards Asia, can East Timor, assuming it does get in next year, can it shift the balance in terms of power, attitudes to China, the South China Sea? What sort of impact will its membership have?
I think it's not going to have a major shift for ASEAN itself, partially because ASEAN's deeply caught in its own sub optimum equilibrium trap. It is, we have to recognize, a relatively small country in terms of its economy, et cetera, and the amount of influence that it will have. It also will have significant needs in order to continue to catch up with the other ASEAN states.
Yeah, I mean, ASEAN is a vehicle that allows countries like Brunei to punch well above its weight. So the same should be said for East Timor.
True.
It is a Catholic country. One would imagine, particularly given the improved relations between Dili and Jakarta over the last 10 years, that it could be expected to side with Indonesia, and it has this troika with Malaysia and Brunei in regards to the Rohingya, and is taking a harsher stance on issues like Myanmar, which we haven't got to yet. But how do you think East Timor could shape up? And it's a democratically elected country.
It is, and I mean the fact that one of the things ASEAN certainly needs is another functioning democracy in the club, because we've seen the rollback of liberalization and democratization throughout the last 5 or 6 years. But I still don't think it's going. I think Timor-Leste is going to be a good member, and it's going to be a valuable member. But I think it's going to take Timor-Leste some time to find its place in ASEAN, and also to begin to navigate the changing landscape that is ASEAN. As we see this growing maritime mainland divide, as we see growing gaps between countries as regards their China policy. Countries are saying, oh, we don't have to pick a side, we don't want to pick a side, but we all know who leans in certain directions. For example, I mean, the Philippines it's very difficult to say you don't lean to one side when you have a defense treaty, and you're actively working towards strengthening that defense treaty to cover other areas as well. And that is what's going on in Manila as they move away from the problems of the Duterte years towards a much more strengthened relationship with Washington. But ASEAN, and as we're going to get into obviously with Myanmar, has some severe internal challenges at this point in time. I think that Indonesia has a lot on its plate. Indonesia does have an ambitious agenda, very, very solidly developed, very well planned agenda for its chairmanship. But at the same time, the question is the old ASEAN model fit for purpose, and is it time to move on? And a lot of people, myself included, would say yes.
And of course, Indonesia is taking over as chair of ASEAN, or just has taken the gavel.
Yep.
From Cambodia. How would you sum up Cambodia's year?
Cambodia had a better year than expected. I think it was overwhelmingly positive. The issues could have stifled it, could have caused issues. The South China Sea, et cetera, did not come up, or were successfully kept from coming up. And broadly, we saw on questions such as Ukraine, Cambodia actually take a pretty strong leadership role in its votes in the United Nations, as well as its overall approach to Ukraine, which was a surprise to quite a few observers. Broadly, though, in terms of the three poles of ASEAN, Cambodia did well. We can't expect it to fix everything, and Myanmar is the outstanding issue.
It is indeed. I mean, I'm a little bit in two minds about Cambodia's efforts to negotiate on, which was stated to normalise relations with Myanmar, was wrong. However, I think they should have been expected to at least negotiate. I mean, if they hadn't, then they're going to stand accused of not doing anything.
There's a lot of folks that would, in light of the structure of ASEAN, in light of the Myanmar military government's decisions as to what it's willing to put up with, this issue, in my view, was a loser from the beginning. I don't think there's really anything else that Cambodia could have done that would have been effective. It requires a give and take from both sides, and Myanmar, in my view, has figured out that, or at least their position is, they've clearly clearly decided they're just going to wait this out. That unless we get something that would be an extreme set of sanctions or something else along Myanmar, they're just going to wait this out and over years try to figure out their relationship with ASEAN. But that's it.
The reaction this year when they had, after Hun Sen's initial visit to Myanmar, Aung Min Hlang referred to him as his brother, and it didn't behave like a brother.
No.
Executed the 4 pro-democracy activists, gave Hun Sen his word he'd release Sean Turnell, the Australian economist, who did eventually get the other 6,000 prisoners, but a little bit too late. And they seem to be able to shoot themselves in the foot every time there's an opportunity that presents itself, in that they wanted to attend these conferences and they were banned. And it's like, be a good boy. This is what you need to do, and they just did the exact opposite.
And they're just not going to do it. They've shown and they've demonstrated that they'll make those statements in public, etc. But once someone gets back on the plane, it's back to business as usual, and they're not up for it. They're not going to move ahead. The 5-point consensus is reaffirmed by ASEAN, but is dead in the water. It doesn't look as though Myanmar's looking forward to participating in this in any way. Has its own approach that it sees as being valid, but ASEAN's not on board with that. So it's, in my view, this is, unless we see some significant instability within the country that further clashes, etc., we're not going to see ASEAN play a major role. It just doesn't appear that's going to happen. Although it is true that that Indonesia could be could break the logjam if it potentially wants to. It has the size, it has the influence. This is, two summits of G20 and ASEAN.
It's the only G20 country.
Exactly. But the question is, will Indonesia want to stake its entire? It's really putting all your chips in and staking your entire ASEAN chairmanship on we're going to resolve this.
Right.
Where there's quite a few other issues that ASEAN has to resolve.
Speaking of which, Russia. I've never been terribly impressed with its presence in Southeast Asia, although it speaks to the opposite. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has made several trips out this way. They've got a toehold in Myanmar through weapons sales, but we're coming to the end of the year. How do you rate them and their efforts?
Yeah, Russia has the historic ties to certain places. We look at Laos, we look at Vietnam, even to some extent, just based upon the 1980s, in Cambodia. But Myanmar is obviously the most straightforward one in terms of the relationship and Russia's been a major patron of the military government. And when you talk about Russia and Southeast Asia, we talk about weapons sales. And it's not even that significant. Myanmar, Malaysia, Vietnam, not in that order. But that's Russia and Southeast Asia. We do not, and previously some growth in tourism. But Russian trade is relatively low. We don't see much Russian presence here really at all. Yes, Lavrov comes and he'll visit Vietnam and et cetera, but beyond that, Russia is, at the end of the day, even despite its signing of the Treaty of Amity and Friendship, is essentially a non-entity in Southeast Asia. I mean, it would be challenging to write a book about it. I don't know where you'd find enough data to look at contemporary Russia in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, there's just not enough. There's just not enough there.
I wrote a column for the Diplomat not that long ago about Russia and Southeast Asia, and some wag underneath the Twitter feed. It would help if they spent some money.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be happening anytime. For Moscow, that's not going to be happening anytime soon. I mean, this has been a bad ASEAN for Moscow. It's been a great ASEAN for Ukraine. I mean, they came in, they get to sign. It's symbolic, but they signed the Treaty of Amity and Friendship, and they have the G20 condemnation.
It's also required to become it's one step away from becoming a dialogue partner. Now, if that was to happen, say, in a year or two, that would put Ukraine on par with Russia.
Yeah, and here in Phnom Penh during the ASEAN meeting, I mean, the hot ticket was meeting the Ukrainian foreign minister.
Indeed.
I mean, that he had a pretty heavy schedule for his time in town.
Very popular.
Very popular.
From Kiev to come to Phnom Penh.
Yeah, exactly. For a debut, it's very well attended.
One country which I love dearly and always seems to be awkwardly torn. Old Russian Cold War ally, but these days Vietnam.
Well, I think Vietnam's had the first big bonus is that COVID's over in Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam did lock down very hard, and there were significant impacts. It was a very difficult place to be resident during COVID. But if we look generally at Vietnam over the last 3 or 4 years, even before COVID, I mean, Vietnam's been a huge winner on U.S.-China trade issues, on the U.S.-China trade fight, and seeing so much offshoring, so much foreign direct investment. The Vietnamese economy is doing quite well. The Vietnamese government is obviously incredibly stable. And Vietnam's issue, of course, is the South China Sea is not being settled, and continuing to run into, what about the future of the Code of Conduct and the South China Sea Code of Conduct? How can this move forward? Can this be established? And increasingly more and more folks seem to be willing to just put it on the table and say the South China Sea Code of Conduct is dead. It is simply not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I mean, how long can you draw it out? China's simply not going to abide by it. It's time to move on. And I think folks are now beginning to, at least in conversations I've had, people do seem to be now willing to say, well, what are the alternatives? What is next here? And I think we're going to start hearing more of that coming out of the think tanks and out of the Track 2 diplomacy stuff, as people start looking at, okay, what is a non-code of conduct South China Sea look like in terms of building some degree of stability?
So the unsettled outlook is actually the norm.
This is simply not something that's going to be settled with the treaty agreement. I mean, the Philippines will be the first country to say, well, we went through international arbitration in The Hague, no, China's never agreed to it. We won that, and no, Beijing hasn't adhered to it. So it goes back to, okay, yeah, Beijing hasn't adhered to that commitment. Why would it possibly be viewed as adhering to another one? It's one of the most fascinating times to look at China because, yes, we do see the changes domestically with Xi Jinping's consolidation, and now we, of course, see the protest. But at the same time, we're not dealing with a China that is brand new. We're not dealing with a China where everyone's optimistic about a harmonious world or optimistic about China's peaceful rise. We've already gone through that, and now we've moved into an era where China has a track record. China has a past.
Indeed, none of this happened before. It's
yeah.
like you want to get into the WTO, okay, you're in. Abide by the rules.
Yeah, and everyone had, there was that famous quote, famous problematic quote by Bill Clinton on WTO saying that this would bring China closer to us. He was referring obviously to the United States and to the West, and saying that that China's entries, and we saw in the early 2000s, I mean, just a flood of academic work of how China's integration into global was really affecting the party, and this was really changing. Oh yeah, and this will be great. And to be fair, I think most China folks haven't been that optimistic about the democracy side for quite some time.
No,
but still, but on other aspects, yes, and there were lots of work done on this topic, and well, that clearly was wrong, and that clearly didn't pay off. So we're at a period where China has a record, and it needs to be examined, as opposed to putting on rose-colored glasses and thinking, oh well, if everyone's level of GDP per capita just hits a certain level, everything's going to be fine. No, it's not.
Right. Overall, though, the West generally for the year seems to have had a good one. Dare I reveal my politics and say that I quite like the Australian government. I think Penny Wong has done a sensational job.
She has.
Getting things back on track in a
it's a lot of things that the West itself couldn't have really controlled. I mean, ultimately, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was what finally what shifted NATO entirely. Fundamentally changed Germany's entire foreign policy, essentially,
Right.
from its previous role with Russia. And we've seen a much more unified West. And yes, we've also seen with AUKUS, although that has brought up some, in my view, relatively invalid criticism of AUKUS. But as an agreement between these three states is quite significant. And for Australia's own role. And of course, Penny Wong comes in. She has, right off the bat, she has a great big victory as China's unable to seal its 10-state agreement in the South Pacific. And Australia comes off awesome. So, okay, this is our backyard, and no, this is not something that should work.
And all we're seeing really is a re-establishment of the powers that be after World War II.
Yes, in what sense?
In the sense that it's almost a reversion to Five Eyes. Not that it ever went away.
Yeah, the relationships, it's deepening, I think, between those, but it's also very interesting to see where the European Union is now, and to see that, okay, we have the German outlook on the Indo-Pacific, we have the French outlook on the Indo-Pacific, we have the ASEAN outlook, everybody, and we have the EU playing a greater role, we have European states involved in joint naval exercises in the South China Sea, so it's also, I think we can't ignore the EU's role, and we can't ignore Europe's increasing activity in the region.
What do you think were the key takeaways from the three conferences?
Altogether, first, I think it just has to be noted that this was a successful conference year for the Southeast Asian states in terms of their leadership, their ability to manage difficult questions during an incredibly difficult time. I mean, we're dealing with post-COVID, we're dealing with Ukraine, we're dealing with Myanmar, and yes, there is issues that ASEAN is clearly not capable of handling, and there are questions raised, but that at the same time, the actual diplomacy was actually taking place, does demonstrate a solid role for Cambodia and Indonesia. These are not easy things to lead, and that was quite impressive. Second, I think the unity on Ukraine has been incredibly impressive, especially we saw the statement from the G20, the declaration, et cetera, at the end of the day. But Russia really being just put into a corner. I mean, Russia is being so isolated is quite impressive to see where that's come about because of its ultimately unjustified aggression. Third is, again, the entry of Timor-Leste, but at the same time, we can't ignore the fact of Myanmar. That Myanmar is the failure on the table. As I said before, I don't think there's anything that Cambodia really could have done as chair that would have that it didn't do that would have been effective, and I base that off of my own perception of the Myanmar government's views and its interests. But we're going to be either Myanmar is going to become considerably worse in a short period of time, which a lot of people are becoming concerned about, or they're in for a drawn out long. It's the bad old days.
Either way, I think Myanmar is going to be the story of next year. I think it's going to increasingly matter.
And we'll see how Indonesia takes on the leadership with it.
On that note, the outlook for 2023?
One topic we haven't discussed is the economy. So I think that's one that is in my mind still. We did see outcomes from the G20 on it. We saw concerns raised about, okay, if we keep seeing interest rates rise in the States and dealing with this, we can see capital outflows from developing countries, which is a concern. We've seen already economic problems, severe, up in Laos, and we've seen it in a few other states as well. So where this goes, and also looking at events today in China, looking at the beginning of protests, and we saw markets in Asia already down 2-3-4% first thing this morning. So we have a lot of variables right now in a very unstable economic situation. We have not fully recovered from COVID. Things are not back to normal. China is still closed, and this is going to be a very volatile period for the next year. So we'll have to wait and see.
Bradley Moon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke Hunt.